بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين نحمده ونسبحه ونقدسه على آلائه ونعمائه ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له إلها واحدا أحدا فردا صمدا حيا قيوما نؤمن له بالربوبية ونقر له بالعبودية من يهد الله فهو المهتدي ومن يضلل فلن تجد له وليا مرشدا ونشهد أن سيدنا محمدا عبده ورسوله أرسله بالهدى ودين الحق ليظهره على الدين كله اللهم صل وسلم وزد وبارك وترحم على محمد وآل محمد كما صليت وسلمت وباركت وترحمت على إبراهيم وآل إبراهيم في العالمين إنك حميد مجيد وصل اللهم وسلم على جميع الأنبياء والمرسلين والشهداء والصالحين وعترة نبيك الطاهرين عباد الله أوصيكم ونفسي بتقوى الله عز وجل قال الله في كتابه الحكيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يخرج الحي من الميت ويخرج الميت من الحي ويحيي الأرض بعد موتها وكذلك تخرجون صدق الله العلي العظيم وصلوا على محمد وآل محمد. A few weeks ago, we mentioned how during the early days of Islam, during the Advent, it seems that the Arabs that were living at the time, the pagan Arabs, didn't really have a perception of the afterlife. In fact, they believed that this life was the only life, and there was nothing really to come after once they died. And the Qur'an quotes them by saying, إِنْ هِيَ إِلَّا مَوْتَتُنَا الْأُولَى وَمَا نَحْنُ بِمُنْشَرِينَ, that death is death, and really there's no resurrection after that. And it's very interesting because the word maut, which we take to mean death, when you examine that word, it has a multiplicity of meanings. So in Arabic, for those of you who are familiar with the Arabic language, we know that there are words that have a multiplicity of meanings. And other languages as well. For instance, I recently learned that in English, the word peruse means two opposite meanings. One is to glance over something, and the other is to study in detail. So it's two opposite meanings. In Arabic, in the Arabic language, likewise, that can happen. So for instance, the word ayn in Arabic refers to the eye, the physical eye. It can also refer to a spy, because a spy is considered someone's eye somewhere, a seeing eye. It also refers to the meaning of a spring, a water spring. Gold and silver are also referred to as ayn. An important person, a prominent person in society is also referred to as ayn. When it comes to the Qur'an, one of the most prominent books on the definitions of the various words in the Qur'an is Mufradat al-Qur'an by the author Al-Raghib al-Asfahani. And when it comes to the word maut, death, he identifies 5 different meanings. One type of death has to do with the idea of regeneration and resurrection. So God tells us in the Qur'an, and he strikes the parable, for those people who doubt that there will be a regeneration and a resurrection, he gives the example of agriculture. So there's agricultural development and agricultural growth and decay, and there's also embryonic growth and decay. Those are the 2 most popular parables that are struck in the Qur'an. So in one verse, in Surah Al-Hajj, for instance, it says, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Ya ayyuhan nasu in kuntum fi raybin min al-ba'th. O people, if you have a doubt about ba'th, which is resurrection, فَإِنَّا خَلَقْنَاكُمْ, surely we created you. Min turab. So your first physical state was dirt. ثُمَّ مِن نُطْفَةٍ, and then from a drop of semen. ثُمَّ مِن عَلَقَةٍ, and then you evolved into a blood clot. ثُمَّ مِن عَلَقَةٍ ثُمَّ مِن مُضْغَةٍ. So the mudgha refers to basically a lump of flesh. ثُمَّ مِن مُضْغَةٍ مُخَلَّقَةٍ وَغَيْرِ مُخَلَّقَةٍ. So some of them are distinguished and some of them are not distinguished. So the point that God is making in this verse is that, look, if God can create you from dirt and then from a drop of liquid and then add a little bit of blood and becomes a blood clot and then after that a lump of flesh, then how is it that He's not able to resurrect you or regenerate you? There's another example in that same chapter that gives the example of agriculture, because remember, this Qur'an was addressed to mostly people who lived in a desert environment, and any time that you have an abundance of rain, like we experienced in the past few days, what happens after that? What looks like it's dead begins to regenerate. It's as if some of these plants and some of these trees, it's almost as if they're resurrected from the dead. Sometimes you go outside during certain seasons when there hasn't been any rain, and you think, wow, what's going on here? And these plants look like they're dead. Well, what happens here, especially in Southern California, when you get 1 or 2 days of rainfall, all of a sudden, it comes back to life. And so God is telling us that, look, in the same way that we can create a human being from scratch, and in the same way we can create plants and trees and grass almost out of nothing, or what you perceive to be nothing, we can create and regenerate and resurrect from death. So that's one type of death, the type of death that has to do with regeneration and resurrection. And it's very interesting because the language of the Qur'an is death is not an annihilation, it's not an end, but rather it's a creation. الَّذِي خَلَقَ الْمَوْتَ وَالْحَيَاةِ. God creates death and He creates life. In the same way that life is behind it has a creative force, death also has a creative force, or rather a recreative force. So this is one type of death that's described or identified in the Qur'an. Another type of death is sentient death, which means death of feeling. Sometimes we experience a death of feeling, and the Qur'an describes people who have a hardened heart. These are people that have lost feeling. They've lost their own feelings so that they've lost compassion and empathy for other people. When the Qur'an describes the Prophet, it tells him, Ya Rasulullah, one of your characteristics that we have given you is an open heart and compassion. He says, وَلَوْ كُنْتَ فَضًّا غَلِيظَ الْقَلْبِ لَنْفَضُّوا مِنْ حَوْلِكَ. It tells him that if you had no empathy towards people, if you had no compassion, if you had no feelings in your heart towards people, there would be no reason for people to be around you. Because it's not about what you believe in your mind, but your heart that you give to people. And this is why we created, God is telling the Prophet, this is why you have such a great following. It's not because of your brain power, but it's because of your heart power. And another way that that's described in the Qur'an is when God speaks on behalf of Maryam alayhi salam when she is giving birth to Isa alayhi salam. When she says, Ya laytani mittu qabla hadha wa kuntu nasyan mansiya. She says that I wish that I had died before this. Not that death, she wished death upon herself, but rather the way that the Qur'an describes it is that the physical pain, that was something on its own. I was reading an article one time and it was describing the physical pain that's associated with childbirth as being doused in gasoline and being lit on fire. The entire body, it's like it's on fire. And I don't, there's no way for me personally to really verify that. But not just the physical pain that was associated with birth, but also in her case, the psychological pain. The fact that she was cast aside. The fact that she was lonely and she had no one except for she had Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so she says, Ya laytani mittu qabla hadha, meaning I wish that I had not felt any of this. So she was wishing upon herself the death, not of her life, but the death of feeling. And it's interesting because, again, that boils down to the issue of having empathy and emotional intelligence. And one thing I want to share with you, I was reading in this book, Emotional Intelligence, and what the author says, he describes what goes inside the mind of a person committing a crime, someone who is raping or molesting, and they did certain studies and they began to draw certain parallels. And what he says is that a psychological fault line is common to rapists, child molesters, and many perpetrators of family violence alike. They are incapable of empathy. This inability to feel their victims' pain allows them to tell themselves lies that encourage their crime. And that's what the Qur'an is talking about, sentient death, the death of feeling. That not only it's the death of their own feeling, but that becomes projected onto other people, so they tell themselves that this person is not going to feel the pain. This person who I'm abusing is not going to feel any of the torment. And then he says, psychopathy, or the incapacity to feel empathy or compassion of any sort, or the least twinge of conscience, is one of the more perplexing of emotional defects. The heart of a psychopath's coldness seems to lie in an inability to make anything more than the shallowest of emotional connections. And so he goes on to say that even though there are biological markers, we're not saying that there's a criminal gene, and we're not justifying it by saying that this person is physically in defect. Because even if we were to determine that there was a quote-unquote physical gene, that wouldn't really, absolve a criminal of what they were doing, right? But that sentient death is mentioned in the Qur'an. So that's the second type of death. The third type of death that's referred to in the Qur'an is intellectual death. What is intellectual death? And this is mentioned in the following verse. Chapter number 6, verse 122. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. أَوَمَنْ كَانَ مَيْتًا فَأَحْيَيْنَاهُ وَجَعَلْنَا لَهُ نُورًا يَمْشِي بِهِ فِي النَّاسِ. It says, have you seen the parable of the one that was mayyit, meaning dead? فَأَحْيَيْنَاهُ. We gave him life. God says we gave him life. But how did we give him life? We gave him life by giving him nur, illumination. And what nur refers to here, illumination, is not actual physical illumination like lights, but rather it refers to knowledge. That he was dead intellectually, and we gave him nur, meaning we gave him knowledge so that he walks among the people. Nuran yamshi bihi fi nas. Kaman mathaluhu fi dhulumati laysa bi kharijin minha. So God says that, are those two people alike? Are those two people the same? The one that is in darkness, meaning the one that is completely intellectually dead, versus the one who was intellectually dead, but we gave him nur, meaning that we gave him knowledge, and he was able to walk amongst the people and spread that light to other people. Another hadith refers to knowledge as light, al-ilmu nur, right? That knowledge is light, and God gives that light to people whom he wills. And, it's very interesting when we're talking about intellectual life and intellectual death, because if you read the Qur'an, it seems that the Islamic perspective is that it's not the brain that's the seat, that contains the seat of the intellect. Rather, it's the heart that contains the seat of the intellect. If you go back thousands of years, they say that one of the earliest believers in this theory was Aristotle. And Aristotle, he believed that it was not the brain that was the seat of the intellect, but rather it was the heart that was the seat of the intellect. And he had different theories about that, and he said the function of the brain was to cool down the heart, because when a person died, when they became cold, is when their heart stopped. So his theory is that the warmness of the body comes from the heart. And the job of the brain is to act like an intercooler, right? You have a turbo and an intercooler. And so it actually cools down the body. And of course, if you were to teach that today in modern medicine, people would laugh that off. But if you think about it, there have been many studies that have been conducted that prove that a lot of our intellectual ability is actually tied to the heart and not the brain. There was a study that was done in 2002 by the University of Hawaii and the University of Arizona. And they looked at 10 people that had received heart transplants or heart and lung transplants. And after they had received the transplants and they were up and running again, what they noticed was parallels in their personality, their new personality that they had taken on, with the people, the donors, the people that had actually donated the heart and the lungs. And they noticed that there were parallels in preferences when it came to music, when it came to food, when it came to arts, when it came to career preferences and career choices. certain things that before they had received the transplant, they were not interested in at all, but once they received the heart transplant, it completely changed the situation for them. They cited one case where one person was a die-hard McDonald's lover, and they received a transplant from someone who was a die-hard vegetarian. And after receiving the heart, they decided, not for health purposes, but for, they said it was because of the new heart, decided to become a die-hard vegetarian. Very, very interesting cases which kind of lead us to believe that it's the heart, not the brain, that's the seat of the intellect. So how do we solve that conflict? Well, some people say that, some scholars, they say that the brain is not the seat of the intellect, but rather it's the seat of cognition. So our sensory perceptions, our basic sensory perceptions, our basic cognition abilities come from the brain. But when it comes to higher intellectual abilities, such as reasoning, that doesn't come solely from the brain, it comes from the heart. And that's why the heart, in the Qur'an, the heart has a lot of value. God, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, describes the heart and protecting the heart and making sure that you come to God, إِلَّا مَنْ أَتَى اللَّهِ بِقَلْبٍ سَلِيمٍ. So there's intellectual death. That's a third type. A fourth type refers to despair and psychological death. And that manifests itself in two ways. In this life, it manifests itself through a depressive state. And if anyone has experienced going through a depressive state, you realize that it's a feeling of despair and almost psychological death, where you're not able to find meaning and pleasure in anything. Yesterday I mentioned the example, for those of you who weren't here, the example of Viktor Frankl, the famous psychoanalyst, and there was a general practitioner who came to him for counsel, and this general practitioner was an older man who had just lost his wife a couple of years before, and he was very sad about that. He was very he was in a state of grief and depression. And so Viktor Frankl, he tells him, well, what if you were able to see yourself in a different way? What if it was you that had passed away and she had to suffer by surviving you because you loved her just as much as she loved you? And so when he was able to see it from a different perspective, it's not that it made it easier for him to bear, but rather it gave his suffering some sort of meaning. Most of the time, we're suffering because we don't understand why we're suffering. And as human beings, we don't only have feelings, but we have feelings about our feelings. Have you noticed that? We have feelings about our feelings. And so we know that suffering is inevitable, but our suffering is multiplied because sometimes we have no idea why we're suffering. And he says all I had to do was give him meaning to his suffering, and he was okay with it. So that manifests itself, that despair and psychological death, it manifests itself in this world in one way, and in the next world, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes those people that are in the hellfire, that their biggest challenge is despair. It's not that the fire is burning their flesh. It's not that. They feel that, but that's not what they're truly suffering from. What they're truly suffering from is a separation from their Creator, from their Maker. And of course, that's vocalized in Dua Kumail. Imam Ali alayhi salam says so eloquently. He says, "Oh Allah," and a translation of what he says is that, "Oh Allah, if you were to place me in torment and in hellfire, that would be okay, but what I would not be okay with and what would cause suffering is my separation from you. And surely I would call out to the people of the fire my love for you and my attachment to you." So that's a fourth type of death. And the fifth and final type of death that's mentioned in the Qur'an is death as it relates to sleep. And that's the most practical, real life, closest thing to death that you'll ever get to. Notice how death is described in the Qur'an. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Holy Qur'an, He says, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, وَهُوَ الَّذِي يَتَوَفَّاكُمْ بِاللَّيْلِ. The word for death is wafat, tawaffa, meaning that he died. God says, وَهُوَ الَّذِي يَتَوَفَّاكُمْ بِاللَّيْلِ, meaning that it is he who basically takes your souls at night. In another verse, he says, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, And this is Surah Al-Zumar, verse number 42. Allahu yatawaffa al-anfusa hina mawtiha. That God takes the souls at the time of their death. وَالَّتِي لَمْ تَمُتْ فِي مَنَامِهَا. At 2 times. Once when they die, and once not when they die, but rather when they sleep. The difference is that death is a permanent taking of the souls, a permanent reservation of the souls, whereas sleep is a temporary reservation of the souls. And that's why scholars have described death as a greater sleep and sleep as a lesser death. And that every time we sleep, and both death and sleep, think about it, both of them are inevitable. Both of them happen. You can't fight death. Human beings have, throughout the ages, human beings have been obsessed with immortality and how to stay younger and how to look younger and how to feel younger. I was just reading, some of you have probably heard, there's a startup. Every other day there's a startup, but there's a startup in the San Francisco Bay Area where you can pay something like $8,000 to have young blood pumped into your veins. And I don't know where they're getting this young blood from. To have it pumped into your veins, because there's this idea that if you pump young blood into your veins, it's going to make you feel younger, you're going to look younger, and you're going to maybe live longer. So human beings over the years, over thousands of years, have been obsessed with this, this mentality of feeling younger, looking younger, behaving younger. The ancient Egyptians were obsessed with immortality, so they mummified their dead and they placed them in a sarcophagus, and they placed with them everything that they thought would take them into a pleasurable experience in the afterlife or the next life or whatever it is that they believed. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reminds us that death is inevitable. You can't run away from it. In the same way that sleep is inevitable, if you've ever tried to fight sleep, it's also inevitable. So death is looked at as a greater sleep, while sleep is looked at as a lesser death. And all of these types are meant to really prepare us for the final abode, to realize that death, again, going back to the pagan Arabs, they believe that there's just one type of death and that's it. There's nothing that comes before that or after that. But when you think about it, there is spiritual death, there is physical death, there is intellectual death, there is sentient death. And all of that in the Qur'an is meant to prepare us for that final death. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to open our hearts, to fill our hearts with empathy and compassion, to fill us with His love, and to strengthen our intellect. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Wal asr inna al-insana lafi khusr illa alladhina amanu wa amilu as-salihat wa tawasaw bil haqqi wa tawasaw bis sabr wa sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين نحمده ونسبحه ونقدسه على آلائه ونعمائه ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له ونشهد أن سيدنا محمدا عبده ورسوله اللهم صل وسلم وزد وبارك وترحم على محمد وآل محمد كما صليت وسلمت وباركت وترحمت على إبراهيم وآل إبراهيم في العالمين إنك حميد مجيد وصلى اللهم وسلم على أوصيائه وخلفائه وعترته وأهل بيته علي أمير المؤمنين وقائد الغر المحجلين وعلى البضعة الطاهرة فاطمة الزهراء سيدة نساء العالمين وعلى سبط نبي الرحمة وسيدي شباب أهل الجنة الحسن والحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين ومحمد بن علي وجعفر بن محمد وموسى بن جعفر وعلي بن موسى ومحمد بن علي وعلي بن محمد والحسن بن علي والخلف الهادي المهدي عجل الله تعالى فرجه وسهل مخرجه وجعلنا من أنصاره وأعوانه عباد الله أوصيكم ونفسي بتقوى الله عز وجل. As we near the days of the commemoration of the life of Sayyidah Fatima al-Zahra salawatullah wa salamu alayha, narrations describe to us an instance where she took what she learned in terms of the words of the Qur'an and the practice of her father, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, in action. And we all know that, you study the life of the Prophet and his progeny, and you realize that when it came to material items, there was the bare bones minimum in their homes. They had just enough to get by. And so it was not a lavish lifestyle. It was not over the top. And through that, they wanted to set the example for their followers. And we're told that Amir al-Mu'mineen, of course, was also, he followed suit. He followed in those footsteps of his teacher. And that he was also a man of very basic means. So when it came time to get married and to offer something as a gift, he really did not have much to offer. Narrations tell us that all he had was his sword and his shield. Those were the only possessions that he had. And so when it came time to prepare that household, he agreed to give up his sword. And the Prophet said, Ya Rasulullah, he said to him, Ya Ali, we need your sword. Don't give up your sword, but rather give up your shield. And so he sold his shield, and with that money he was able to purchase the goods that were required to initially furnish the house. We're told that the Prophet himself purchased a dress for his daughter in order to prepare her for that day. And so on that day, as they were preparing for the occasion and for the celebration, a poor lady came knocking at the door of Fatima Zahra alayhi salam, asking for something that she may sustain herself with. And Fatima Zahra really had nothing to give her except for the dress that was given to her. And so she gave it up. And when the time came for them to perform the wedding celebration, the Prophet requested from her that she wear the dress that he had prepared for her. And she turned to him and she said, my dear father, I had given it away to someone who was more in need than I was. And so when he asked why she did that, she quoted the verse from the Qur'an, لَن تَنَالُوا الْبِرَّ حَتَّى تُنْفِقُوا مِمَّا تُحِبُّونَ, that you shall not attain righteousness until you give up and spend from that which you love. Not just to spend, but to give that which is most beloved to you. And the moral of that is not to give up. I'm not saying go out and give your pair of Jordans away. It's sometimes you have to realize and ask yourself, what do you love the most? Is it your time? Is it those couple of hours, those 2-3 hours when you go home and you're tired after work and you want to just sit on the couch and watch Netflix or something? Maybe giving your time is a worthwhile investment. Maybe that's how you attain righteousness. Maybe something that you don't give to someone, but rather you just give it up for the sake of God. Maybe that's the way to attain righteousness. So ask yourself, what is it that I love and what am I willing to give up in order to attain greatness, in order to attain righteousness? And if we examine ourselves in this day and age, everyone around us, brothers and sisters, is in need. In some way they are in need. Maybe financially people are not in need, but spiritually people are in need. Emotionally people are in need. Sometimes people have everything when it comes to family, entertainment. They have all their means. They have car. They have gas in their tank. They have food in their fridge. They don't need that, but maybe they need love from someone. Maybe they need to feel compassion from someone. Maybe they need to feel significant from someone. Maybe that's what you need to do. So we need to ask ourselves, what do the people around me need? How do I become more of an aware citizen? How do I become someone who people can rely upon? And just to end with the note, I was asked by our dear brother Hajj Ja'far Yasai to mention this, and some of you were here last night, and our dear brother Hajj Samir Amiri mentioned that in light of the recent events with the government shutdown, and you read the statistics and the numbers, and close to 1 million people or more are out of their jobs, are out of their livelihoods. And so as citizens, this should stir something within us. This should awaken something within us. What can we do to improve the lives of those that are around us. And so as an attempt to help out in that, if anyone that you know is in need of a short-term loan that we can provide for them interest-free, whether they are from our community or outside our community, please contact us and we can set something like that up. Because at the end of the day, we want to be people who are aware of the situation around us, and we want to be able to help people as much as we can. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He chooses us to carry out His mission of compassion and help. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless us and to allow us the intercession of the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. اللهم اغفر للمؤمنين والمؤمنات والمسلمين والمسلمات الأحياء منهم والأموات تابع بيننا وبينهم بالخيرات إنك مجيب الدعوات إنك قاضي الحاجات إنك على كل شيء قدير برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. There are a couple of very quick announcements. Inshallah, tomorrow we will resume